Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. This week in Illinois in Focus, we'll discuss Governor J.B. Pritzker's testimony before Congress on Illinois' sanctuary status, as often violent protests erupted in Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago, and elsewhere, and as more protests are planned this weekend. We'll also discuss a new labor policy report that ranks Illinois near the bottom among states, and the sentencing of longtime former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan after his conviction on 10 corruption-related charges. We'll explore these topics and more when we return.
Teacher Lauren Johnson returned all the graded essays but one. He believed that one student was capable of more.
I don't believe taking the middle of the road is your philosophy. This time, write something you really believe.
The student wrote a new one about excellence. Instead of just grading an essay, Mr. Johnson changed a life. I am that student. I became a writer, and I wrote this to thank him.
Thank a teacher and pass it on from passiton.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. We are recording this on Thursday afternoon, June 12th. Governor J.B. Pritzker joined the Democratic governors of New York and Minnesota today to testify about their states' and cities' sanctuary policies that prevent local and state law enforcement officers from cooperating with federal immigration officers. Joining me to discuss this is Illinois editor Greg Bishop. Greg, you watched the hearing this morning.
Yeah, the hearing as we record this, taking a little bit of a break as they continue with just a few more questions at the tail end of it. It's been all day here watching what's going on in Washington, D.C., where you've got Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. They are defending their migrant sanctuary policies that ultimately says state and local law enforcement cannot cooperate with federal immigration officers enforcing federal immigration law if all they have is a civil detention order. And this seems to be a line that's drawn here with the law, at least in Illinois. We've got the Trust Act. We've also got a Way Forward Act. These measures essentially saying that local and state law enforcement can't cooperate with federal immigration officials. But even Governor J.B. Pritzker, before his testimony today in front of the U.S. House Oversight Committee, he had talked about how, yes, indeed, the federal government will get cooperation if there are criminal detention orders from a judge with a warrant, but anything less of that, they're not going to cooperate. Now, when you get into the weeds of this issue, it really comes down to things like local county jails and whether or not they can call Immigration and Customs Enforcement and say, hey, we've got a non-citizen here. We just picked up on whatever charge. We see that they're a non-citizen. Come pick them up. Illinois law enforcement are prohibited from doing that. They're also prohibited from even asking about the immigration status of a criminal defendant or anybody they come across in their regular day-to-day police activities. So these are some of the things that Republicans are saying are hamstringing law enforcement from keeping the rule of law and by helping federal enforcement of immigration laws. This conversation, obviously, about public safety, but you got to also consider the taxpayer cost. One line of questioning that Governor J.B. Pritzker experienced at the U.S. House Committee, you had a Texas Republican state representative ask him how much money's been spent on non-citizen migrants, or Republicans referring to them as illegal immigrants. But even that, there was a lot of parsing of words between the Democratic governors and the Republicans asking questions as to what is illegal, or are they asylum seekers? Are they undocumented? But the bottom line about the cost, Governor Pritzker couldn't answer what the cost was. And even Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, he reiterated how he got a similar answer from Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, who testified weeks ago in front of the U.S. House Oversight Committee, and also couldn't answer how much it cost taxpayers. So the questions and answers were a lot of political theater, Dan. It's always interesting to see how Congress handles these things, but you have some Congress people not even asking any questions, just taking up all their 5 minutes with very heated rhetoric, either against President Donald Trump and the actions he's taken to federalize the National Guard in California to try to keep the peace around federal buildings, to just the idea of going and taking people who are in this country illegally and working them through the deportation process. So the hearing, as I said, it's still going on, a lot of fireworks, and even some interesting rabbit holes that some legislators decided to go down. One particular question to Governor Pritzker came out of nowhere, and it was about men in women's bathrooms. So they had a little exchange on that, and the governor from Illinois seeming to ask why that's even being injected into this, and he said that seems to highlight that this is more political dog and pony show, but clearly a lot's being said here, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of fallout from the words here at that U.S. House committee.
I saw that clip of Pritzker being asked that unrelated question about men in women's bathrooms, but that was related to a tweet that he sent out, right? Where he sort of invited men to overtake women in the bathroom?
Acknowledged the tweet that the congressman held up, but it all spurred from that as a way to protest or something, to have men go into women's sports. Or not sports, but bathrooms. Again, the governor didn't acknowledge the tweet. He didn't say, yeah, I sent that, but instead seemed to try to just get around the question entirely and actually bring it back to the issue of immigration.
Let's focus on that then. In regarding to the costs, Pritzker said he couldn't answer how much the state has spent on migrant services. We know from our own reporting, though, but that on health care alone, the two different programs in Illinois, one that's ending because of the state's budget issues, but that Illinois taxpayers have spent, it's over $1 billion.
$1.6 billion plus over 3 years for the health benefits for immigrant adults and health benefits for immigrant seniors programs. The adults program is going by the wayside with the new budget the governor's expected to sign. That starts July 1st. But yeah, so that's just the healthcare subsidies, Dan. We don't know necessarily how much has been going out to welcoming centers across the state. Tens of millions of dollars there. You've got possibly tens of millions of dollars that are going to nonprofit groups that may help facilitate non-citizen migration in the state of Illinois. You've got the state that even Chicago, hundreds of millions of dollars going to housing and helping with even legal services for non-citizens and food and education. So when you add all this up, it's several billions of dollars that Illinois taxpayers have been paying for non-citizen migrants in the state of Illinois.
I'm taking it that Pritzker defended the state's sanctuary policies and the city's sanctuary policies throughout the first part of the hearing.
Yeah,
as you mentioned, it's still going on.
Angle that the governor hinted he was going to take, and he took, was that he was going to essentially say that they took state policies and made state law the way it is in Illinois as a sanctuary state for non-citizens, because he says the federal government has failed. The federal government has not brought about what Democrats call comprehensive immigration reform. Republicans quickly pushed back on that. They said that it didn't take a new law to stop the border from being porous. It just took a new president, and even President Donald Trump has said that. So while the Democrats are trying to push for comprehensive immigration reform, they're getting pelted with questions about the various fatalities that have been done at the hands of non-citizens in Illinois, in particular in Urbana. Chairman James Comer started off the committee hearing talking about a woman who was killed during a traffic crash where the driver was a non-citizen who actually fled the scene, was picked up in Texas under a different name, and is facing those charges. So, him leading with that, and of course the Lake and Riley story, pretty prominent, and the governor's having to respond to questions about that. But most notably, Dan, the conflict between what's going on between Trump and Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, that's also been central to this hearing. One of the Democrats, I believe Maxwell Frost, from Florida, he straight up asked each Democratic governor, are you willing to be arrested? As you've heard some threats thrown around from, border czar Tom Homan, and even President Donald Trump seemingly joking about arresting Gavin Newsom. all the governors said that they would be willing to be arrested to stand up for what they say are the rights of non-citizens in their states. Governor J.B. Pritzker said Homan can try to arrest him, and even Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, saying, come on over. So interesting to hear that line of questioning as well and the response from the various governors.
Want to go back to when the governors were asked about these migrants in the U.S. illegally who have committed these violent crimes. Did Governor Pritzker or any of the governors have good responses?
Governor Pritzker has said time and again that violent criminals should not be allowed in neighborhoods, and if they're here illegally, they should be deported. And he was asked that multiple different ways and different angles. A lot of over talking, Dan, a lot of reclaiming time, when it comes to, the legislators asking yes or no questions and then getting, a paragraph response. So the governor's been pretty steadfast in making that clear. But when it comes to a bunch of hypotheticals that may be asked, it seemed that all three of the governors were really willing to, play in that hypothetical space.
Gotcha. One more question on this topic before we move on, Greg. Governor Pritzker was heavily criticized when during his joint State of the State / budget address, he referenced the term Nazi something like 5 or 6 times in reference of President Trump. I understand during this hearing, too, a Democrat also used the term Nazi to describe what's going on with Trump's immigration policies.
And again, a lot of heated rhetoric. The ranking Democrat member did have opening statements and really went heavy into that direction, talking about dictators and Nazis and even Minnesota Governor Tim Walz having to answer to a recent commencement address he made where he alluded to ICE being the Gestapo. So a lot of heated rhetoric there, Dan, and it doesn't seem like it's going to cool down anytime soon because this particular hearing, as I said, we're here at 2:30 recording this on a Thursday. The hearing started at 9 and they're still coming back for some more questions.
Somewhat related topic, Greg, we're expecting protests this weekend in Chicago and across the country as President Donald Trump to celebrate the anniversary of the U.S. Army, 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, is planning a military parade in Washington, D.C. What do we know about that?
This is No Kings, or I forget what the name of the protest is, but it looks like it's organized to have a multi-city mass protest. No Kings Day, I think is what they're calling it. And we're going to see a lot of activity in Chicago, in L.A., in New York, and beyond. Where there's going to be an expectation of peaceful protests. We'll see how much peace there is. And whether it stays peaceful. But even in recent days, and even at this hearing today, the issue of, civil discourse and peaceful protests and when it crosses the line into riots, it's very much been a focus of a lot of the questions, with, even Governor J.B. Pritzker saying, I encourage people to get a bullhorn and to stand up and speak out. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson earlier this week, talking about how they fully anticipate increased ICE activity in Chicago. And Johnson saying that people should fight back. They should stand up and speak out. But there has been universal condemnation of any kind of violence. There's been condemnation of any kind of lawbreakers, and both sides saying that they will be held accountable. But at the same time, you've got Democrats, anytime they're asked about the lawlessness that we saw in Los Angeles and some of it that we saw in Chicago even, the Democrats are quick to point out January 6th, 2021. Saying that Republicans are the ones responsible for that. So a lot of finger pointing, and the issue of whether or not these protests remain peaceful, and what kind of response federal officials will make, especially with the president already having, federalized the California National Guard to keep the peace there. Could we possibly see similar types of things happen in Chicago, for instance? We'll be watching over the weekend for sure.
Once again, Illinois lawmakers, Republicans in particular, are calling for the repeal of the SAFE-T Act, SAFE-T Act, which included in that is the no cash bail provision. What happened? This
horrible story. Another story where you see the headline and just it's a gut punch. Young child dies at a home where parents were allegedly doing a lot of illicit drugs, a lot of neglect in the home. Apparently, the young 2-year-old got into some kind of illicit substance. And instead of the parents calling the paramedics, they apparently tried to get some kind of Narcan delivered by a delivery service. And then, the child was ultimately dead. But the parents were let go under provisions of the Pretrial Fairness Act, which is part of the Safety Act. And state representative has joined others and has been talking about this for weeks, about how they need to repeal the Safety Act because of the no cash bail provisions, allowing for people who are being charged with really heinous crimes to be allowed to be out of jail pending trial. They'll still have to go to trial. They'll still have to face their charges, but they won't be in jail pending trial. And that's got a lot of people upset because it's just one of a slew of stories that have been making headlines across Illinois since the Safety Act and the Pretrial Fairness Act was put into law in September of 2023. And this kind of does go into the previous conversation, Dan, a bit, because, as a reporter, people read my stuff, and I've got sources in law enforcement in the rank and file that share incredible stories with me about how they may, interface with somebody suspected of robbery, and then there's a fight, and then the law enforcement officer gets banged up, and then they find out that the individual is here illegally. They can't even ask about their legal status. And then when it comes to the prosecution of it, these individuals aren't getting charged with all of the charges they should be, according to some of these law enforcement sources. And it hurts law enforcement morale. It's impacting their ability to, as they want to keep the streets safe, and also hurting the accountability of the offenders and the victims as well. So there's a lot of unease about the Safety Act and how it's been implemented in the Pretrial Fairness Act, whether or not Republicans' concerns are going to be heard. When we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when the legislature was still in session, State Representative Cam Buckner, a Democrat from Chicago, admitted the Safety Act is not a perfect law, and he's open to having conversations with Republicans. But I don't think those conversations are actually happening, especially with the legislature off this summer. We'll see if there's anything kind of other headlines that are going to spark more conversation about the repeal or the modification of the Safety Act when they come back during October fall veto session.
Thank you, Greg. You're right. That is a sad story. We'll see what happens from here. A report released by the American Legislative Exchange Council this week. It's called States That Work, a Labor Policy Roadmap Across America. It ranks all 50 states on their adoption of pro-worker, pro-growth labor reforms. And not surprisingly, Illinois doesn't.
We got ranked about 40th overall, and didn't do too hot when you break down some of the metrics. These types of reports anymore, Dan, as somebody who's been reporting on Illinois now for 11 years, it's almost predictable. And you can see the different types of metrics, these groups that evaluate economic indicators or labor market indicators or, business friendliness indicators, taxation indicators. Regularly, Illinois, you can kind of predict what these reports are going to be just by watching what the legislature does. When the legislature looks to double the gas tax, no question, Illinois' gas tax is going to be among the highest. When the legislature tax on even more business regulations and labor mandates, no question, Illinois is not going to fare well on a report from ALEC about, labor policies and whether a state is working or if it's not working. So Illinois has a slew of different types of employer mandates that neighboring states don't have, different types of costs, let alone the property tax costs. You work in the workers' comp costs and a whole host of other costs for businesses. And it makes for not necessarily being a glaring example of a business that works, according to that most recent ALEC report.
The timing of this next story that we're going to talk about, not great in terms of when we're recording it and when it's actually going to happen, but it's an important story. Longtime former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan is scheduled to be sentenced Friday afternoon tomorrow on 10 corruption-related counts. Tell us what he faces and
12 and a half years is what prosecutors are asking for, and about $2.5 million in potential fines being levied against the former State House Speaker. And this comes after he was convicted on 10 counts. I think they're all together like 23 counts. But a jury came back with 10 guilty convictions for the longest serving State House Speaker. Whether or not, he's going to serve all 12 and a half years, we'll find out Friday. But Friday's going to be a long, long day in federal court in Chicago. Our reporter Jim Talamonte will be in there to monitor what happens and to ultimately get down to, why the sentence handed down was handed down. Federal prosecutors say 12 and a half years is appropriate because it needs to send a message to others who are elected officials that they can't be bad actors and violate the public trust. There was a conversation about Madigan's wealth and should that be considered when it comes to the monetary damages. And also, you've got Republicans who are complaining that while Madigan was being found guilty, state legislators did nothing about ethics reforms to address the actions that were revealed in the federal trial. So clearly the issue of ethics, especially as Madigan gets ready to face his fate of how much time he may have to serve, it's an ongoing issue. Governor Pritzker says he's interested in ethics reforms, but the legislature just couldn't get it across the finish line before the end of the spring legislative session.
Greg, Madigan is 83 years old. If he were to be sentenced to 12 and a half years in prison, that essentially could be, just speculating, a life sentence for the former speaker. He'd be 90.
And some of the questions about the sentence, will it be all 12 and a half years, or is the judge going to take some leniency because of his age, or how exactly the judge in this case is going to decide? It's going to get a lot of reaction. There's no question.
Going back to ethics reform, of course, Republicans have been pounding their fists for years and years trying to get ethics reform passed in the state legislature, which is controlled, of course, by Democrats, super majorities in both the House and the Senate. Very little really has been done on that. After Friday's sentencing of the longtime former House Speaker, they might come back for special session just because of budget-related issues in regards to the federal government cutting back spending. I mean, do you think, I know I feel guilty even asking you this question. What are the chances Illinois is actually going to pass some ethics reform?
It's a good question. Republicans say they have the legislation ready to go to give the legislative inspector general more ability to investigate wrongdoing, to clean up the campaign finance issues of legislators being able to use campaign finance funds for legal defense. Those are just a couple of things Republicans say they're ready to go with. Democrats, though, it doesn't seem like they're willing to cooperate with Republicans, though they may say they are willing to cooperate. We just really haven't seen that play out so far this year.
Speaking of potential for a special session, are you hearing anything more?
One of the big things that they may have to tackle is the transit cliff. And if you got CTA and RTA and all these other transit agencies saying they're going to do massive cuts and service restrictions, that could spur on the legislature to call a special session to deal with that. But really haven't heard much as far as if that's going to happen, or if they'll just wait to pick that up during fall veto session, which has been scheduled. Dan, put it on your schedule. It's the 3rd week of October and the 4th week of October. They'll be in session for 6 days in October.
Thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with all the stories we talked about, but want to particularly focus on the Madigan sentencing story. We will be on top of that, and we will be reporting it at thecentersquare.com.